She kissed a stranger to escape her ex-boyfriend, not knowing he was a billionaire CEO. Before we begin this story, tell me where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Enjoy the story.
The city blurred past the taxi window, a Monet of steel and glass. But Claire Donovan saw none of it. Her hands were clasped so tightly around the leather portfolio in her lap that her knuckles were white. I hope I get there in time, she thought, her heart hammering against her ribs in a frantic rhythm. This job could change my life. Imagine, executive assistant to Julian Sterling, the most powerful CEO in the country. It felt less like a job interview and more like an audience with a king. This was her one shot to pull herself out of the financial tailspin of the last few months. Her phone vibrated, pulling her from her reverie. It was her best friend, Sarah. Claire smiled, expecting a last-minute good luck call. "Claire, I can't believe you didn't tell me, but I am so happy for you. Congratulations on the engagement." Sarah's voice bubbled over with joy. "Just make sure you don't forget my wedding invite, okay?" Claire's brow furrowed in confusion. The taxi hit a pothole, jostling her, but her mind was already reeling. Engagement? What engagement? "I just saw it on Mark's social media. That's why I'm calling you. The pictures look amazing." The world stopped. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Mark's social media. The man she loved, the man she thought she was building a future with, had announced his engagement, but not to her. The location sealed it. The Grand Elysian Ballroom. His client event. It was all a lie. And if he was celebrating with someone else, there was only one person it could be: Chloe. A cold, brittle calm washed over Claire, chasing away the nervous excitement and leaving something sharp and dangerous in its place. The interview, the CEO, the life-changing job, it all dissolved into meaningless static. The carefully constructed professional she had been just moments ago was gone. "Change of destination," she said, her voice low and steady as she leaned forward to speak to the driver. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his eyes widening slightly at the storm brewing in hers. "Where to, miss?" She met her own gaze in the mirror. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her jaw was set like stone. The Grand Elysian Ballroom, and step on it. The Grand Elysian Ballroom was even more opulent than the picture suggested. Crystal chandeliers, the size of small cars, dripped light onto a sea of people dressed in silks and tailored suits. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the murmur of polite, privileged conversation. Claire, in her simple navy suit, felt like a ghost haunting a party she was never meant to see. Her portfolio was still clutched in her hand, a useless relic of the woman she had been just 20 minutes ago. She scanned the room, bypassing the smiling faces and clinking champagne flutes. There was no grief in her gaze, only a laser-like focus. And then she saw them. They were holding court near the grand staircase, a picture of smug perfection. Mark, her Mark, was beaming, his arm wrapped possessively around her cousin's waist. And Chloe was radiant, soaking in the attention, her hand angled just so, ensuring the diamond on her finger caught the light from every possible angle. She was laughing, a triumphant, tinkling sound that made her blood run cold. She moved through the crowd, a shark gliding through a school of unsuspecting fish. A few people turned to look, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, the approach of a storm. When she was 10 feet away, Chloe's eyes met hers. The triumphant laughter died in her throat, her face freezing in a mask of shock. Mark followed her gaze, and his confident smile evaporated, replaced by a pathetic deer-in-the-headlights panic. Claire stopped in front of them. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The icy calm in her tone was more devastating than any scream. "Well, well," she said, a humorless smile touching her lips. What a lovely client event, Mark. I see you've closed the deal. Claire, I can explain. Can you? She shifted her gaze to her cousin, whose face was now pale with guilt and fear. And you, Chloe, you've wanted everything I've had since we were 6 years old, from my favorite doll to my spot on the debate team. I have to admit, I'm impressed. This is a new low, even for you. But I guess it makes sense. You can finally have my leftovers. Chloe flinched as if she'd been slapped. A waiter, oblivious, approached with a tray of champagne. Claire smoothly took a full flute from the tray. She raised it, looking directly at them both, her hand perfectly steady. A toast, she announced, her voice ringing with clarity and drawing the attention of everyone nearby. To the happy couple, may you get everything you deserve. And with a slow, deliberate movement, she inverted the glass, pouring the entire stream of golden bubbling champagne over Chloe's perfectly coiffed hair.
A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Chloe let out a shriek as the cold liquid dripped down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. Mark was frozen, his mouth agape in disbelief. Claire didn't linger to admire her work. She placed the now empty flute back on the stunned waiter's tray. "Thank you," she said to him politely. Then, without another glance at the mess she had created, she turned and walked away, her back straight and her head held high. She could hear Mark's voice behind her, breaking through the shocked murmurs of the crowd. "Claire, wait! Damn it, Claire, let me explain!" His footsteps were gaining on her. She pushed through the ballroom's grand entrance and into the marble lobby, desperation beginning to claw at her composure. She couldn't let him talk to her, couldn't let him poison her with his pathetic excuses. She needed to escape. Her eyes darted around, searching for any exit, any distraction. And that's when she saw him. A tall man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, standing alone near a corridor, looking at his watch. He had an air of quiet authority. He must be a waiter, she thought, or maybe a manager. Perfect. Without a second thought, she strode towards him just as Mark burst into the lobby behind her. Mark's voice was a desperate, grating sound behind her. "Claire, just listen to me for 1 second." She couldn't. She wouldn't. Her eyes locked on the man in the dark suit. He was an anchor in her swirling vortex of chaos. As Mark closed the distance, shouting her name, Claire's mind went quiet. All the planning, all the meticulous organization that defined her life dissolved. All that was left was pure, unthinking instinct. She reached him in 3 long strides. He looked up from his watch, his gray eyes cool and assessing, showing only a flicker of surprise as she invaded his personal space. There was no time for words, no time for permission. She put her hands on the firm lapels of his suit. The fabric felt impossibly fine, like nothing she had ever touched, rose onto her toes and pressed her lips against his. The kiss was a desperate, tactical collision. It was meant to be a shield, a performance for the audience of one behind her. But for a fleeting second, the world fell away. He was still, unmoving, a solid presence against her trembling frame. He smelled faintly of bergamot and cedarwood, a clean, expensive scent that was both grounding and completely intoxicating. For Julian Sterling, a man whose days were scheduled down to the minute, a man who hadn't been genuinely surprised in over a decade, the moment was a system shock. He was completely blindsided. He had been drafted into a war he didn't know existed. Claire broke the kiss, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't step away, instead using his proximity as a shield as she turned her head to face a stunned Mark. "Leave me alone, Mark," she said, her voice shaking but laced with newfound defiance. "It's over. This is my new boyfriend." The lie hung in the air, clumsy and audacious. Mark's eyes flickered from Claire to the silent man she was still clinging to. He scanned Julian's simple, elegant suit and his location near a service corridor, and his shock curdled into a sneer of condescending amusement. He saw a uniform, not a masterpiece of tailoring. He saw a staff member, not a titan of industry. A cruel, ugly laugh escaped him. "Him? Are you kidding me, Claire? You're leaving me for a waiter?" He took a step forward, puffing out his chest. "This is your big upgrade? I was going to give you everything, and you run off with the hired help?" He looked at Julian up and down with disdain. "Tell me, pal, what's the hourly rate for standing around? Is it enough to take a classy girl like this to the kind of greasy spoon diner she secretly loves?" Throughout the verbal assault, Julian remained perfectly still. His expression was a neutral mask, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He didn't flinch at the insults. He simply watched, his analytical gaze moving from Mark's pathetic display of dominance to the fierce, cornered woman standing before him. And in her terrified but unbroken eyes, he saw a fire he hadn't encountered in a very long time. He was utterly intrigued. Emboldened by Julian's unshakable calm, Claire found her voice again, this time clear and cutting. "I'd rather have a man with integrity who serves drinks than a man with no honor who serves only lies." She looked at Mark one last time. All the love she ever had for him curdled into pity. "Now, get out of my sight." Before Mark could retort, Claire did the most impulsive thing she had done all day. She grabbed the stranger's hand, a move that surprised them both, and pulled. "Let's go," she whispered.
She tugged him away from the lobby, down the quiet, carpeted corridor he had been standing beside, leaving Mark standing alone amidst the echoes of his own humiliation. They rounded a corner, and suddenly the sounds of the party were gone. It was just the two of them, standing under the dim light of a wall sconce, her hand still holding his. The adrenaline began to fade, and the crushing reality of what she had just done, kissing a complete stranger, inventing a relationship, and dragging him into the wreckage of her life, came crashing down around her. The silence in the corridor was deafening. The distant, muffled throb of the party music only served to amplify the raw, awkward space between them. Claire's heart was beating a wild tattoo against her ribs. She looked down and realized, with a jolt of horror, that she was still clutching his hand. She let go as if his skin were electric, taking a clumsy step back. The stranger didn't move. He simply watched her, his gray eyes unreadable. Now that the adrenaline was gone, she could see him more clearly. His suit wasn't just a suit, it was a work of art, fitting his tall frame with a precision that bespoke incredible expense. There was a quiet, powerful stillness about him that was the opposite of a waiter rushing to his next task. A cold knot of dread began to form in her stomach. "Oh my God," she whispered, the words tumbling out in a mortified rush. "I am so sorry. I don't know what came over me. You were just standing there and he was... and I panicked. That was completely insane and unfair to you. I'm just gonna go. You can forget this ever happened. Again, I am so sorry." She turned to flee, but his voice, calm and deep, stopped her dead. "Are you all right?" It wasn't the question she expected. There was no anger, no annoyance, just a simple, direct inquiry. She turned back to face him, unable to form a response. He took a small step forward and bent down, picking something up from the plush carpet. A single sheet of paper had slipped from her portfolio during the chaos. Her cover page, her meticulously researched strategy for her first month at Sterling Innovations, her name and the job title, Executive Assistant to the CEO, were printed in a clean, professional font right at the top. The humiliation was so intense it felt like a physical blow. Of all the things for this stranger to see, it was the evidence of her now shattered professional dream. She snatched the paper from his hand, her face burning with shame. "Thank you." "Sterling Innovations," he said, his tone conversational, though his eyes were sharp and analytical. "Ambitious." "Was," she corrected him, her voice cracking. "I was supposed to be in an interview an hour ago." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod.
a flicker of something she couldn't decipher in his gaze. "Well," he said after a moment, "for what it's worth, he didn't seem worth the trouble you went to." The unexpected validation, the simple acknowledgement that she wasn't crazy, broke through her wall of composure. A sob caught in her throat. Mortified, she spun around before the tears could fall. "Thank you for not having me arrested," she choked out, and then she fled, half walking, half running, down the long, empty corridor and away from the man whose name she didn't even know. The journey home was a blur of shame and heartbreak. The cold fury that had propelled her through the confrontation had evaporated, leaving a hollow, aching void. She was no longer a woman taking a stand. She was just Claire, in a taxi, her one good suit probably smelling of champagne and defeat. She had no boyfriend. She had no job prospects. She had, in the span of a single afternoon, detonated every last piece of her life. As the taxi sped through the glittering city, Claire Donovan finally let the tears fall, mourning the woman she was supposed to become. Back in the quiet corridor of the Grand Elysian, Julian Sterling watched her go, his expression thoughtful. A moment later, a sleek man in an identical suit approached him. "Mr. Sterling, the board members from Tokyo are waiting in the conference suite." Julian's gaze shifted from the empty corridor to his associate. He glanced down at his own hand, the one she had held so desperately. He could still feel the faint tremor. "Reschedule the meeting, David," he said, his voice decisive. "Tell them I will fly to Tokyo tomorrow to meet with them personally and offer my sincerest apologies for the inconvenience." David's eyes widened in shock. Julian Sterling did not reschedule meetings. "Sir, is everything all right?" Julian pulled out his phone, his thumb already scrolling through his contacts. He stopped on the name Eleanor Davis, head of HR. "Everything is fine, David," Julian said, a rare, enigmatic smile playing on his lips as he pressed the call button. "In fact, I think things are about to get very interesting." Claire's apartment felt different. The four walls that had been her hopeful command center this morning now felt like a prison cell of her own making. The navy suit, her armor, lay crumpled on a chair, a discarded second skin. Her portfolio was still on the floor, its contents scattered like fallen leaves after a storm. Useless, dead. She sank onto her couch, the silence of the room amplifying the roaring in her head. A highlight reel of the day's disasters played on a loop. Sarah's cheerful, clueless voice, Chloe's triumphant smile, the cold, sticky feel of champagne on her fingers, the shocked stillness of the stranger she had kissed. Shame, hot and acidic, churned in her gut. She had always been the responsible one, the planner, the one who never lost her cool. Today, she had become a spectacle. Her gaze fell on the framed photo of her mother on the nightstand. Her mom, a no-nonsense woman who had raised her alone, had always preached the gospel of resilience. "You can sit in the mud and cry," she could almost hear her mother's voice saying, "or you can get up and wash yourself off. The mud will still be there, but you'll be ready for what's next." There was no fixing the betrayal. There was no undoing the kiss. But there was one last loose thread from her old life she could tie up, one small act to reclaim a shred of her professionalism. With a deep, shuddering breath, she walked to her desk, pushed aside the scattered papers, and opened her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she composed a short, formal email to the HR department at Sterling Innovations. She hit send and closed the laptop with a click that felt like a coffin lid shutting. It was over. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, an unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed again, persistent. With a groan of frustration, she snatched it up. "Hello?" A crisp, professional woman's voice answered. "Hello. May I speak with Claire Donovan?" "This is she." "Ms. Donovan, this is Eleanor Davis, Head of Human Resources at Sterling Innovations. I'm calling about your interview." Claire's heart plummeted. "Miss Davis, yes, I just sent you an email. I am so incredibly sorry for today. I received your email, thank you, Ms. Davis said, and I'll be direct. Normally, a no-show for an interview would immediately disqualify a candidate. Company policy is very strict on that. I understand, Claire said, her voice small, bracing for the final rejection. However, Ms. Davis continued, her tone shifting slightly, your resume is, frankly, one of the most impressive we've seen. Your portfolio and your references are exceptional. It is highly unusual, but our company also has a principle. We don't let top-tier talent slip away because of one mistake. Given the strength of your qualifications, we are prepared to make a one-time exception and reschedule. Claire froze, unable to believe what she was hearing. Her qualifications? They were? Making an exception for her? Ms. Donovan, are you still there? The final step of our process is a meeting with the executive you would be supporting. There is an opening in the schedule for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Are you available? A final interview. An exception. Hope, fragile and an unbelievable flicker to life in her chest. Yes, Claire heard herself say, her voice a distant echo. Yes, 9 is perfect. Excellent. We'll see you then. Please come to the 50th floor. The line went dead. Claire stared at the wall, her phone still pressed to her ear. A second chance. An impossible, illogical, miraculous second chance had been granted, not by pity, but by her own hard work. Her resume had saved her. She had no idea why the policy was being bent or who had authorized it. All she knew was that her dream wasn't dead.
And she had no idea she was about to walk into an office and come face to face with the handsome stranger whose life she had turned upside down just hours before. The next morning, Claire felt like a soldier heading back into battle. She stood before her closet, looking at the navy suit. Yesterday, it was armor. Last night, it was a costume of defeat. This morning, after hours spent meticulously cleaning and pressing it, it was a uniform of redemption. This wasn't just a second chance. It was a test of her resilience, and she refused to fail. The Sterling Innovations headquarters was a spear of glass and steel piercing the clouds. The lobby was a cathedral of minimalist design, all white marble and silent, efficient people. It was intimidating, but Claire held her head high. She had earned her place here, she reminded herself. Her work had earned it. She was escorted to the 50th floor, a realm of hushed carpets and panoramic city views. An assistant with a polite smile led her to a pair of massive oak doors. "He's ready for you," she said, gesturing for Claire to enter. The office was breathtaking. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a godlike view of the sprawling city below. A large, clean desk of dark wood sat in the center, free of any clutter. A man stood with his back to the door, looking out that window, holding a porcelain coffee mug. Steeling her nerves, Claire stepped inside, the door clicking softly shut behind her. "Good morning, sir," she began, her voice clear and professional. "Thank you again for this extraordinary opportunity." The man turned slowly, and Claire's world stopped spinning. It was him, the man from the hotel, the stranger, the waiter. He was dressed not in a simple dark suit, but a bespoke charcoal one that fit him with the same effortless perfection. In this context, in this seat of immense power, there was no mistaking him. The quiet authority she'd mistaken for a manager's demeanor was the quiet authority of a king in his castle. Every ounce of blood drained from her face. Every prepared answer, every rehearsed line evaporated into a fog of pure, unadulterated horror. The CEO she was here to meet, Julian Sterling, The man whose name was synonymous with power and genius was the man she had forcibly kissed in a hotel lobby to escape her ex-boyfriend. He broke the suffocating silence, his voice the same deep, calm tone that had cut through her panic the day before. "Miss Donovan, please have a seat." Numbly, she moved to the chair in front of his desk and sat, her portfolio clutched in her lap like a life raft. He rounded the desk and sat opposite her, the picture of executive grace. He slid her portfolio, which was already sitting on his desk, toward him and opened it. For a torturous minute, he simply read, his face a neutral mask. "Your resume is, as I'm sure you've been told, flawless," he began, his eyes still on the page. Then he looked up, and his cool gray eyes met hers. "But this role requires more than just skill. It requires the ability to handle unexpected and high-pressure situations, situations that are not in the playbook. Tell me about a time you had to make a quick, decisive judgment call in a volatile environment." This was it. The question was a perfectly aimed weapon. He wasn't just asking a question, he was asking for her confession. She could lie, she could invent some story from a past job, but she knew it would be useless. He had seen her at her absolute worst. The only path forward was through the fire. She took a deep breath, channeling her mother's strength. She met his gaze directly, her voice shaking only slightly. "Yesterday," she said, stronger this time. "Yesterday I was confronted with a sudden and deeply painful personal crisis in a very public setting. I had to extricate myself from the situation immediately before it escalated further. My solution was unorthodox. I made an impulsive choice and involved an innocent bystander, which was unprofessional and reckless. I deeply regret that. But in that split second, I assessed the threat, formulated a strategy, and executed it. It was messy, but it was decisive. And it taught me a valuable lesson, that the line between our personal and professional lives is thin razor, and that our character is defined by how we handle ourselves when that line is crossed." She finished, her heart pounding, certain she had just professionally crucified herself. The silence that followed was the longest of her life. He watched her, his expression giving nothing away. Slowly, he closed her portfolio. He leaned back in his chair, studying her for one more agonizing moment.
Then he smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it reached his eyes, transforming his stern face into something warm and genuine. "That," Julian Sterling said, his voice laced with an admiration that stunned her, "was the correct answer. The person who assists me is more than an admin. They are my gatekeeper, my strategist, my first line of defense. The role requires impeccable integrity, fierce loyalty, and the courage to make a bold move when everything is on the line." He leaned forward, extending his hand across the vast expanse of the desk. "Yesterday, Claire, you showed me more about your character than a dozen interviews ever could. You protected yourself with fire and grace. That's who I want by my side." He paused. "Welcome to Sterling Innovations. When can you start?" Claire started on Monday. Julian Sterling's professional life, she discovered, was a hurricane. His schedule was a disaster of double bookings and conflicting priorities, a testament to the inadequacy of his previous assistant. Within 3 hours, Claire had triaged his calendar, rescheduled non-essential meetings, flagged the critical ones, and compiled a streamlined briefing document for his entire week, complete with background on every person he was scheduled to meet.
She placed the printed color-coded folder on his desk without a word while he was on a conference call. When he hung up, he picked it up and scanned the contents. He was silent for a full minute, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. "How did you know the Bancroft merger is on the verge of collapse?" he asked, his voice neutral. "I cross-referenced the meeting attendees with recent stock market activity and noted that their lead counsel, who should be present, was mysteriously absent from the list. I confirmed with your legal department that they haven't received any correspondence in 3 days. I took the liberty of moving it to the top of your agenda." He looked at her, and for a moment the CEO facade dropped. She saw the man from the hotel corridor again, the one who saw everything. "You bring order to chaos," he said, a statement of fact. "I was right about you." The quiet praise was more potent than any formal accolade. A warm flush spread across her cheeks, and she quickly retreated to her own desk just outside his office, her heart fluttering. This was where she belonged. The sense of peace lasted until precisely 2:15 p.m. That's when Victoria Croft appeared. She was a vision in a blood-red dress, a stark contrast to the office's cool gray tones. Tall, stunning, with a predatory grace, she was the head of the company's venture capital division and, as Claire would soon learn, had been openly campaigning to be the next Mrs. Sterling for the past year. She strode directly toward Julian's door, completely ignoring Claire's presence. Claire stood up smoothly, physically blocking her path. "Good afternoon. May I help you?" Claire's voice was polite but firm. "I doubt it. I have an urgent update for Julian. I don't need to go through the help." "Mr. Sterling is on a call and has asked not to be disturbed," Claire countered, unflustered. She was the gatekeeper. This was her job. "Oh, sweetie, you must be new. You don't understand. I don't schedule time. His door is always open for me." "His door is closed," Claire said, not moving an inch. "And my name is Claire Donovan. I'm his executive assistant. All scheduling, without exception, now goes through me." The air crackled with tension. Victoria's eyes narrowed into slits. Just as she was about to deliver a venomous retort, Julian's office door swung open. He stood there, phone in hand, an unreadable expression on his face. He had clearly heard the entire exchange. "Is there a problem, Victoria?" he asked, his voice calm but with an edge of steel. Victoria's demeanor instantly changed. She became soft, concerned. "Julian, darling, I have a critical update on the Helios project, and your new girl here seems to think a calendar is more important than a multi-million-dollar investment." Julian's gaze moved from Victoria's pleading face to Claire's composed one. "Claire is not a girl," he said, his voice dropping a degree colder. "She is my assistant, and she is correct. Her job is to protect my time, and I have my full authority and my complete confidence. From now on, there are no exceptions." Then he looked at Claire. "Thank you, Claire." The dismissal was absolute. Victoria's face flushed a deep, ugly red. To be so thoroughly undermined in front of the new hire was a humiliation she would not soon forget. She gave Claire a look that was pure poison. "Of course, Julian," she purred, forcing a smile. "I'll send your assistant an email." She turned on her 5-inch heel and stalked away, the click-clack of her shoes echoing like gunshots in the quiet office. Claire let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. She had won the first battle, but as she saw the look of cold fury Victoria shot back at her from down the hall, she knew the war was just beginning.
The days that followed were a whirlwind of focused intensity. Claire thrived in the demanding environment, her natural talent for organization and foresight proving to be the perfect counterpoint to Julian's relentless pace.
She learned to anticipate his needs, having his coffee on his desk moments before he realized he wanted it, and preparing research documents for questions he hadn't yet thought to ask. A quiet, professional rhythm developed between them, an unspoken synergy that made the entire 50th floor run with unprecedented efficiency. One evening, they were the last two left in the office, finalizing a presentation for an early morning flight to London. The city lights twinkled below, a sea of diamonds against black velvet. Julian emerged from his office, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He placed one on her desk. "You haven't stopped all day," he said. It wasn't a question. "Even my company's most valuable assets need to recharge." Claire looked up, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling." "Julian," he corrected her gently. "When we are the only 2 people in the time zone, you can call me Julian." A small smile touched her lips. "Okay, Julian." Testing the name felt both strange and surprisingly natural. "And thank you." "You're excelling, Claire," he said, his gaze serious. "More than I could have hoped for. I know the circumstances of our meeting were unconventional, but I'm glad you were the one I found standing in that hallway." The sincerity in his voice sent a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. It was a moment of genuine connection, a silent acknowledgement of the bizarre event that had brought them together. It felt like they were a team. That feeling made the events of the next day all the more devastating. The task was critical. A set of finalized, signed acquisition documents had to be delivered via international courier to a firm in Zurich by 5 p.m. Swiss time, which meant they had to leave the building no later than 11 a.m. The entire deal hinged on this deadline. Claire handled it with her usual meticulous care. She quadruple-checked the documents, sealed the package herself, and booked a priority pickup with their most trusted courier service. The confirmation email arrived at 10:30 a.m. The courier was scheduled for 10:45. Everything was perfect. She notified Julian that it was handled. At 10:40, her desk telephone rang. It was Victoria. Her voice was a frantic, panicked rush. "Claire, thank God. I'm in a meeting with the board's financial committee, and my projector has died. They need the Q3 revenue projections for my division now, and my tablet isn't syncing. Can you please pull them from the shared drive and email them to my personal account? It's a complete emergency." It was a highly unusual request, but the panic in Victoria's voice sounded real. "Of course," Claire said, immediately wanting to help. "It will just take me a minute to find the file." It took her 5. The file was buried deep in the archives. By the time she had found it and sent it, she returned to her desk with a sense of relief. She glanced at the clock. 10:50. The courier had surely come and gone. At 3 p.m., Julian buzzed her intercom. "Claire, could you send me the tracking number for the Zurich acquisition? I want to confirm it's cleared customs." "Right away," she said, navigating to her emails sent folder to pull up the dispatch confirmation. But it wasn't there. A cold prickle of unease ran down her spine. That was impossible. She knew she had received it. She searched her inbox, her trash, her archives. Nothing. Her heart began to beat faster. She logged into the courier company's portal. There was no record of a scheduled pickup for their account today. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She sprinted from her desk to the mailroom in the basement. And there, sitting on the outbound shelf, was her perfectly sealed, critically important package. It had never left the building. The deal was dead, and it was her fault. Her hands trembled as she picked up the package and took the elevator back to the 50th floor. She felt sick. All the trust she had built, all the progress she had made was about to be obliterated. She walked into Julian's office, her face pale, the package in her hands feeling like a tombstone. He looked up from his work, his initial smile fading when he saw her expression. "Mr. Sterling?" she said.
her voice barely a whisper. "There's a problem with the Zurich acquisition. The documents, they never left."
The silence in the room was heavy and absolute. Julian's gaze was fixed on the package in her hands, then slowly lifted to meet her eyes. There was no explosion, no shouting. Instead, a chilling stillness settled over him, an intense, controlled calm that was far more terrifying than rage. The warmth from their late-night conversation was gone, replaced by the icy demeanor of a CEO who had just been told $100 million deal with dead. "Explain," he said. The word was a splinter of ice. Claire's throat was tight, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. She would not cry. She would not make excuses. She would own her failure. "I booked the priority courier at 10:30 this morning for a 10:45 pickup," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "I received the email confirmation. I informed you it was handled. A few moments ago, when you asked for the tracking number, I discovered the confirmation email was gone, and the courier company has no record of the booking. I found the package in the mailroom. It was never picked up." She took a steadying breath. "I can't explain how it happened. I can only say that it happened on my watch. The responsibility is mine, and I am profoundly sorry." She did not mention Victoria. She had no proof, only a sickening suspicion, and an accusation without evidence would be a career-ending act of unprofessionalism. Julian pushed himself away from his desk and walked to the massive window, his back to her. He stared out at the city, his hands clasped behind his back. The silence stretched, each second a new weight on Claire's shoulders. She braced herself for the inevitable, for the words, "Pack your things." "This doesn't make sense," he said, finally, his voice low and thoughtful, speaking more to the window than to her. He turned around slowly, his eyes narrowed in analysis, not anger. "Think, Claire. What else happened this morning? What happened between the moment you booked that courier and the pickup time? Anything at all out of the ordinary?" The question unlocked the memory. I got a call. Around 10:40. It was Victoria Croft. She said she was in an emergency meeting with the board and needed a file immediately. It took me a few minutes away from my desk to find it for her." The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Julian's expression hardened, a flicker of cold understanding in his eyes. He now saw the whole chessboard. He knew exactly what had happened. But instead of focusing on the saboteur, he focused on the solution and his most valuable player. His trust in her was absolute, and he showed it not with words, but with immediate, decisive action. He picked up his desk phone and pressed a button. "Get Marcus in security on the line, now." He waited a beat. "Marcus, I want all CCTV footage from the corridor outside my office and the 50th floor elevator bank time-stamped between 10:35 and 10:50 this morning. I want it on a tablet and on my desk in 5 minutes." He hung up before Marcus could reply. Then he looked at Claire, and the CEO was gone, replaced by a field general rallying his most trusted soldier. "Forget the courier. The deal is not dead until I say it's dead," he said, his voice electric with newfound purpose. "Go to my hangar at the private airfield. Tell them to have the Gulfstream ready for an international flight in 90 minutes. We're flying to Zurich." Claire's jaw dropped. "What?" "You and me," he confirmed, already shrugging on his suit jacket. "Pack an overnight bag. We'll work on the plane. While you're doing that, find out where Klaus Schmidt, the head of the Zurich firm, is having dinner tonight. Book a table. We're delivering these papers by hand." He picked up the package from his desk, a look of fierce determination on his face. "Victoria Croft wanted a war. She doesn't realize I have a weapon she never accounted for." He looked directly at Claire. "You." Stunned, speechless, but with a surge of adrenaline and a wave of overwhelming loyalty, Claire simply nodded. He didn't just believe her, he was betting his entire deal on her. The attack that was meant to destroy her career had just launched her into the stratosphere, right by his side. "I'll make the calls now," she said, her own voice filled with a new, unshakable resolve.
The 90 minutes that followed were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Claire operated like a field surgeon in a crisis, her phone in one hand, her laptop open with the other. In a dizzying ballet of efficiency, she confirmed the jet's flight plan, packed a small, sensible overnight bag, arranged for a car to meet Julian at the airfield, and secured a dinner reservation at Kronenhalle, one of Zurich's most legendary and difficult-to-book restaurants, the favorite haunt of Klaus Schmidt. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a clarity of purpose she hadn't felt since the day of her interview. She wasn't just an assistant, she was part of a mission. Stepping onto the tarmac and seeing the sleek, silver Gulfstream waiting for them, its engines humming softly, felt like stepping into another reality. The interior was the epitome of understated luxury. Cream leather, dark mahogany, and the faint, clean scent of wealth. Julian was already inside, his jacket off, sleeves rolled up, and his laptop open. The hurricane was back in his eyes. "Schmidt's reservation is for 8 p.m., Claire said, slipping into the seat opposite him as the jet door sealed, shutting out the rest of the world. "That gives us a 7-hour flight and roughly 45 minutes from landing to get to the restaurant. It will be tight." "We'll make it," Julian said, his focus absolute. "Let's use this time to tear down our initial proposal and rebuild it. It's not strong enough if Schmidt was already getting cold feet." For the next 5 hours, they were a seamless unit. They dissected financial models, rewrote key clauses in the contract, and role-played the negotiation, with Claire taking on the part of the skeptical Swiss businessman. He was continually impressed, not just by her organizational skills, but the sharp, intuitive nature of her business insights. She saw angles he had missed, and pointed out potential ego traps in the language of the contract. He stopped treating her as an assistant and started treating her like a partner. As they crossed over the coast of France, the work was finally done. A new, stronger proposal lay printed and bound between them. The flight attendant served a light dinner, and for the first time, the intense professional energy in the cabin softened. Julian leaned back, closing his laptop. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. He said quietly, "The security footage confirmed it. Victoria called you from her desk. As soon as you were out of sight, she walked over to your workstation. She was there for less than 10 seconds. She canceled the booking and deleted the confirmation. It was clean, arrogant, and almost perfect." Claire let out a shaky breath, the final confirmation of her suspicion feeling both vindicating and sickening. "What will he do?" "He will handle it when we get back," his voice leaving no room for doubt. Then he leaned forward slightly, his gaze intensifying. "What I don't understand is why you didn't mention your suspicion to me. You protected her. Why?" Claire considered her answer carefully. "Accusation without proof is career suicide. It would have been my word against the senior executives. I would have looked petty and incompetent. My only option was to own the failure and take the consequences." A look of profound respect dawned on his face. "Integrity," he said softly, "even when it would have cost you your job." He paused, swirling the wine in his glass. "This world, my world, is filled with people like Victoria, people who see others only as rungs on a ladder. It's difficult to know who to trust." He looked up, and his eyes locked on hers, the gray depths holding a startling vulnerability. "In all my years, I've found that there are two types of people, those who are loyal to power and those who are loyal to principle. The first kind is useless. The second is priceless. You, Claire Donovan, are priceless." The raw honesty of his words hung in the air between them, more intimate than any touch. He wasn't her boss in that moment. He was just a man, acknowledging a deep, foundational connection he had found in the most unexpected of circumstances. Before Claire could find her voice to respond, the soft chime of the intercom came on, and the pilot's voice filled the cabin. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Donovan, we are beginning our initial descent into Zurich. We should be on the ground in 20 minutes." The spell was broken. The professional tension snapped back into place. Julian straightened his tie, the CEO once more. Claire gathered their documents, her mind racing. They were a team, a partnership forged in betrayal and crisis. And now they were about to descend from the clouds and walk into the lion's den together. The descent into Zurich was a swift transition from the intimate bubble of the jet back to the sharp reality of their mission. A black Mercedes was waiting on the tarmac, and as the car sped through the pristine, orderly streets of the city, Claire felt her focus narrow to a razor's edge. She was no longer an assistant. She was an envoy, a strategist, half of a two-person strike team on a mission to salvage a deal. Kronenhalle was a bastion of old-world power. The walls were paneled with dark, lustrous wood and adorned with original masterpieces of Chagall and Miro. The air was filled with the hushed murmur of German and French, the clinking of heavy silver on porcelain. Julian moved through the space with an easy, innate confidence, but Claire felt a flicker of intimidation. She smoothed down the simple, elegant black dress she had the foresight to pack, her heart hammering against her ribs. As they were led to the table, Julian caught her eye, giving her a subtle, reassuring nod. "We are a team."
Klaus Schmidt was already there. He was exactly as she'd pictured, in his late 60s with steel gray hair, a perfectly tailored suit, and eyes as sharp and cold as the Alpine peaks. He stood as Julian approached, his surprise evident. "Julian," he said, his German accent precise and clipped. "An unexpected surprise. I was just about to dine alone." "I apologize for the intrusion, Klaus," Julian said smoothly, shaking his hand. "I felt it was best to handle this matter in person. This is my associate, Claire Donovan." Schmidt gave Claire a cursory, dismissive glance, a polite but meaningless nod. "Your secretary, yes? A long way to travel to take notes." Before Claire could even react, Julian stepped in, his voice firm and clear, establishing the new reality. "Ms. Donovan is not my secretary, Klaus. She is my executive advisor and the lead strategist on this acquisition. She holds my full confidence and my complete proxy. This deal does not happen without her approval." The statement hung in the air, a deliberate power play. Schmidt's eyes widened slightly, and he looked at Claire again, truly seeing her for the first time. The dismissal in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of grudging curiosity. The dinner was a masterclass in negotiation. Schmidt was a shark, circling the unfortunate clerical error as evidence of systemic sloppiness at Sterling Innovations. "If you cannot handle a simple package, Julian, how can I trust you with the future of my company?" he challenged. Julian answered with vision and charisma, painting a picture of their shared future. But when Schmidt began to pick at the fine print of the contract, Julian seamlessly deferred. "On that point, I'll let my advisor speak. Claire has a deeper knowledge of the specifics than I do." Thrown into the spotlight, Claire felt a surge of adrenaline. "Mr. Schmidt," she began, her voice steady, "you raised a concern about the employee pension clause. My analysis of your company's long-term liabilities shows that your current plan is unsustainable beyond the next 7 years. Our proposal not only protects your employees, but guarantees the pension solvency for the next 30. We are not just acquiring your company, we are securing its legacy and the future of the people who built it." She spoke with a command of the facts that was irrefutable. Schmidt, who had expected platitudes, was met with an unassailable wall of data and empathy. He was visibly taken aback, his respect for her growing with every point she made. The turning point came with the coffee. Schmidt, cornered but proud, made one last stand. "The offer is acceptable," he conceded, "but I want the 5% personal bonus clause added for my role in the transition." It was a classic ego play. Julian didn't even look at the contract. He turned his full attention to Claire. "Claire, what do you advise?" The entire deal, hundreds of millions of dollars, rested on her response. She looked directly at Klaus Schmidt, her expression respectful but unyielding. "Mr. Schmidt, tonight, Mr. Sterling rerouted his private jet and flew 4,000 miles to sit at this table. He did this to show you the respect he has for you and for the company you have built. He did this to prove that when we make a promise, we will cross oceans to keep it. She slid the original, unsigned contract across the table to him. "This deal is our promise. It is generous, it is fair, and it is our final offer. We hope you'll accept it in the same spirit of partnership with which it is being offered." A long, tense silence followed. Schmidt stared at her, then at Julian, who sat perfectly still, implicitly backing every word she said. He saw a unified front, a partnership of vision and intellect that was more formidable than any single CEO. He let out a slow breath, and, for the first time that evening, he smiled. He picked up a pen from his jacket pocket and signed the documents with a flourish. "Congratulations, Mr. Sterling, and to you, Miss Donovan. You have a deal." An hour later, they were walking along the cobblestone streets bordering Lake Zurich. The cool night air was filled with a sense of electric victory. The mission was accomplished. "Executive advisor?" Claire asked, a playful smile on her lips. "You earned the promotion somewhere over the Atlantic," Julian replied, his own smile visible in the moonlight. He stopped walking and turned to face her, the calm water of the lake behind him. The professional energy of the dinner had faded, leaving something else in its place, something softer, more potent. "I was serious at the restaurant, you know. I could not have done that tonight without you." He looked at her, his gaze dropping from her eyes to her lips and back again. The distance between them suddenly felt charged, a space filled with unspoken words and the memory of a desperate kiss in a hotel lobby. The world seemed to shrink until it was only the two of them, standing by a lake in a foreign city, on the verge of a breakthrough far more significant than any business deal. The air between them was a fragile, shimmering thing. Claire's heart, which had been steady and professional throughout the negotiation, was now a wild bird beating against her ribs. She could see the reflection of the moon in Julian's eyes, a flicker of light in their serious gray depths. "We did it together," she finally managed to say, her voice softer than she intended. The corner of Julian's mouth lifted in a small, genuine smile. A team born from a rather unconventional recruitment strategy. He let out a soft, low chuckle. "Do you ever think about that? That this entire partnership, this deal, our flight across the ocean, it all happened because you needed a quick escape from a bad ex-boyfriend?"
He said it without a trace of mockery. There was only a sense of profound wonder in his voice, as if he were still trying to comprehend the sheer, random chance that had brought her crashing into his perfectly ordered life. "I try not to," she admitted, a blush rising on her cheeks. "The memory of the sheer, crippling embarrassment is still quite fresh." "Don't be embarrassed," he said, his voice dropping lower as he took a half-step closer. The space between them shrank, now charged with an undeniable current. "Claire, I have to be honest with you. From the moment you turned and walked away from that confrontation, leaving chaos in your wake, I haven't been able to stop thinking about that day. But not for the reason you think." He reached out, his hand gently touching her arm, sending a jolt of electricity through her. "It wasn't the kiss. It was the fire in your eyes. It was the courage. In that single moment, I saw a woman of principle and passion who would rather set her own life on fire than let someone else burn her down. I saw the person I'd been looking for my entire professional life." He paused, his thumb gently stroking her arm. "And maybe my personal one, too." The admission hung in the cool night air, raw and real. This was it. The line they had been carefully towing was about to be crossed. "I think," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "that our first kiss was a strategic maneuver. A brilliant one, but tactical nonetheless." His gaze was intense, searching hers. "This time, I'd like for it to be for real. May I?" She couldn't speak. She could only nod, her entire being singing with a resounding yes. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. She didn't. She met him halfway. The first kiss had been a collision of desperation and surprise. This one was a slow, deliberate discovery. It was gentle at first, a question and an answer.
And then it deepened into a wave of pent-up emotion. The shared victory, the implicit trust, the profound respect they had for one another. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, they rested their foreheads together, breathing in the same cool night air. The world felt different, irrevocably shifted on its axis. He reached down and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers in a way that felt both perfectly new and completely natural. They began to walk, slowly, back toward the lights of the hotel, their hands linked between them. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, the question encompassing everything. The deal, the office, Victoria, them. "Now," he said, squeezing her hand, "we get a few hours of sleep, then we fly home, and we face whatever comes next." He looked at her, his expression clear and resolute in the moonlight. Together. It felt like the perfect end to a perfect victory. As they walked, a unified and formidable team, they were blissfully unaware of the storm gathering 4,000 miles away. They didn't know that Victoria Croft, having seen the security footage of her own sabotage being requested, was no longer just planning to oust a rival. She was now planning her revenge, and her next move would not be aimed at Claire's job, but at the very heart of the integrity Julian so admired. The flight back from Zurich was a journey through a dream. The high-altitude bubble of the Gulf Stream became their own private world, a sanctuary, where the strict lines between CEO and executive advisor blurred into a comfortable, unspoken intimacy. They talked for hours, not about contracts or valuations, but about their lives, their pasts, the paths that had led them to this improbable moment. For the first time, Claire saw the man behind the Titan, the wry humor, the intellectual curiosity, the subtle loneliness. And he, in turn, saw the brilliant, resilient woman behind the professional armor. They landed in New York as a different entity than when they had left. A partnership forged in crisis had been tempered by honesty into something far stronger. They agreed, wordlessly, to keep their new dynamic private within the office walls. But as they walked back into Sterling Innovations the next day, there was an invisible current arcing between them, a shared secret that hummed beneath the surface of their professional interactions. Julian was a man of his word. At 10 a.m. sharp, his intercom buzzed on Claire's desk. "Please ask Miss Croft to come to my office." Victoria arrived moments later, a triumphant, self-satisfied smirk on her face. She clearly assumed their trip had been a failure, and that Claire was about to be fired. The smirk faltered when she saw Claire, calm and composed, at her desk. It vanished entirely when Claire stood and opened Julian's door for her. Claire didn't hear the conversation, but she didn't need to. There was no shouting. There was only a low, controlled monologue from Julian. And then 10 minutes later, Victoria emerged. Her face was a thunderous mask of fury and humiliation. She didn't look at Claire as she stormed past, but the hatred emanating from her was a palpable force. Later, Julian explained the outcome. "I didn't fire her. That's the easy way out, and it could lead to legal complications. Instead, I've put her on formal probation and removed her as lead from the Helios project, the one she was so concerned about." He paused, a glint of steel in his eyes. "I've also instituted a new protocol. All of her division's proposals now require final review and sign-off from you." It was a masterful move, a corporate checkmate. For a woman as proud as Victoria, being forced to submit her work to the help she so despised was a fate worse than termination. But Julian had underestimated Victoria's capacity for venom. Defeat did not humble her, it radicalized her. She now knew she couldn't attack Claire's competence, as Julian viewed it as infallible. She couldn't attack her position because Julian himself would defend it. So she would have to attack the one thing that was so core to Claire's character that proving it false would shatter the very foundation of their bond, her integrity. For the next 2 weeks, an unnerving peace settled over the 50th floor. Victoria was publicly docile, submitting her work to Claire with a cloying, false politeness that was more unsettling than her open hostility. Claire and Julian fell into a comfortable rhythm, their professional synergy deepening, their stolen moments, a shared coffee, a lingering look over a spreadsheet, becoming the highlights of their long days. They were happy. The attack came on a Tuesday. It was silent, digital, and devastating. An alert flashed across every terminal in the company. A bombshell story had just been published by the Financial Sentinel, the industry's most respected news outlet. The article revealed, in excruciating detail, Sterling Innovation's top-secret plan to acquire a smaller but highly innovative biotech firm, a deal Julian had been cultivating in absolute secrecy for 6 months. The fallout was instantaneous. The target company's stock shot up by 40%, making the acquisition prohibitively expensive, effectively killing the deal. The leak was a catastrophic act of corporate espionage. The article was meticulously sourced, quoting internal memos and citing a source with direct access to the CEO's office. Julian was a tempest of controlled fury, immediately calling an emergency meeting with his heads of security and legal. Claire's heart ached for him, watching him as the project he was so passionate about crumbled into dust. An hour later, as Claire was fielding frantic calls, Julian's head of security, a stern ex-FBI agent named Marcus, appeared at her desk. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Mr. Sterling would like to see you in his office," he said, his voice grim. Claire walked in, expecting to help strategize their response. She found Julian standing by the window, his back to her, in the exact same position he had been in the day the Zurich package had failed. The air was thick with a dreadful, heavy tension. "Julian?" she asked softly. He turned around, and the look on his face stopped her heart. It wasn't the anger she expected. It was a look of deep, profound, and agonizing conflict. In his hand he held a tablet, which he placed on the desk between them. On the screen was a preliminary forensics report. It showed the digital path of the leaked documents. They had been sent from an encrypted, anonymous email address, but the IP address of origin, the digital fingerprint of the computer that had sent them, was unmistakable. The trail led directly back to a single source, to the workstation assigned to Claire Donovan. The digital forensics report on the tablet was a dagger of ice plunged directly into Claire's heart. She stared at the screen, at the cold, irrefutable data, the IP addresses, the network logs, the timestamps. Her mind couldn't process it. It was a language she didn't speak, but the translation, provided by the grim-faced head of security, was brutally clear. "That's impossible," she whispered, her eyes lifting from the tablet to Julian's face, searching for a lifeline. "Julian, I would never. You know I wouldn't. I don't even know how to do something like this." She expected him to dismiss it out of hand, to wave Marcus away, to stand by her without a moment's hesitation. But he didn't. He stood frozen, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. He saw the Julian who had trusted her in Zurich, at war with the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation who had a duty, a responsibility to the hard evidence in front of him. And for the first time, she saw doubt in his eyes. The silence was broken by his voice, but it wasn't his voice. It was the voice of the CEO, cold, distant, and formal. "Can you account for your workstation's activity at 2:17 a.m. this morning, Ms. Donovan? That's the timestamp on the outbound data packet." The use of her last name felt like a slap. It was a deliberate, painful severing of the intimacy they had built. "I was at home," she stammered, her defense sounding weak even to her own ears. "I was in bed, asleep. My computer was here, on my desk." Marcus, the head of security, stepped forward. "Sir, the evidence is conclusive. The leak originated from this workstation using Miss Donovan's credentials. Company protocol in cases of corporate espionage is unequivocal. We must suspend her access to all systems and escort her from the premises pending a full internal and potentially criminal investigation." The word criminal hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. Claire looked at Julian, her eyes pleading with him to intervene, to stop this nightmare. He was the most powerful man in the building. He could stop it with a single word. But he didn't. He looked at the report, then at his security chief, then for a fleeting, agonized moment at her. He was trapped. To defy the evidence and his own security protocols would be an act of professional suicide. To accept it would be a betrayal of everything he had claimed to feel for her. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod to Marcus, his eyes fixed on a point on the far wall, unable to look at her. "Follow protocol." The two words shattered what was left of Claire's heart.
It was the most humiliating experience of her life. Marcus and another guard stood over her as she packed her few personal items: a framed photo of her mother, a coffee mug, a small plant, into a cardboard box. The entire 50th floor watched in stunned silence, their whispers following her like a plague. She didn't cry. She was too numb, too broken. As they walked her to the elevator, she risked one last look at Julian's office. The door was closed. The taxi ride home was a silent scream. She had been so careful. She had worked so hard. She had finally allowed herself to trust someone, to believe in a shared future. And in the space of an hour, it had all been revealed as a fragile illusion. He hadn't believed her. When it mattered most, the data had won. The evidence had beaten the trust. She let herself into her empty apartment, the cardboard box clutched in her arms. The grief was a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. She sank to the floor and finally let a single, hot tear of betrayal trace a path down her cheek. But as the hours passed, the deep, aching grief began to cool, hardening into something else. It was the same cold, clear fire that had sent her to the Grand Elysian ballroom. She had been wronged. She had been perfectly, brilliantly framed. Victoria had not just taken her job, she had branded her a criminal and destroyed the most promising relationship of her life. Claire looked at the photo of her mother. You can sit in the mud and cry, or you can get up and wash yourself off. She got up. She washed her face. She sat down at her personal laptop, the only tool she had left. They had taken her access, her job, her reputation, but they had underestimated her. She wasn't just an assistant, she was a strategist, and Julian had taught her to be a fighter. She was locked out, but she still knew the company's weaknesses, its systems, its players, and she knew her enemy. If she couldn't prove her own innocence from the outside, she would have to find a way to prove Victoria's guilt. The game had changed, and Claire Donovan was about to make her own move. The first 24 hours were a blur of numb disbelief, but as the sun rose on the second day of her new, shattered life, Claire's grief began to recede, replaced by the cold, clear-headed logic that was her greatest strength. She was a strategist, and this was the most complex problem she had ever faced. She sat at her kitchen table, her personal laptop open.
On the screen was a simple mind map. In the center, a single question. How did Victoria frame me? The facts were brutal. The leak occurred from her workstation at 2:17 a.m. She was not there. This meant remote access. Such access would require bypassing several layers of Sterling Innovations' state-of-the-art cybersecurity, a feat far beyond the capabilities of a venture capitalist like Victoria. Conclusion: she had help, an accomplice on the inside, someone with high-level IT privileges. She closed her eyes, forcing herself back to the 50th floor. She replayed the past few weeks in her mind, not the emotional moments with Julian, but the mundane details she absorbed every day. The background noise, the faces in the elevator, the names on inter-office memos. Her mind was a finely tuned filing system, and she began to search the archives. And then she found it, a memory, insignificant at the time, but now glaringly bright. It was from the week before the Zurich trip. She had been walking past the high-end coffee bar in the lobby and had seen Victoria in a hushed, intense conversation with a man. It was unusual because Victoria rarely mingled with anyone below the executive level. The man was Gavin Price, a senior network security analyst. She remembered him because he had submitted a budget request for a server upgrade that she had flagged for Julian's review. At the time, she'd seen it as a senior executive conferring with a tech expert. Now she saw it as a queen recruiting her pawn. Gavin was the key, but how to approach him? A direct accusation would be useless. He would deny everything and alert Victoria, closing the only door she had. She needed a different kind of key, not a battering ram, but a lockpick. She found him on a professional networking site. His profile was filled with self-important posts about cybersecurity and complaints about corporations not taking digital threats seriously. He was arrogant, and he believed he was smarter than everyone else. That was his weakness. That was her entry point.
She crafted the message with the precision of a surgeon. Subject: confidential query. Gavin, I hope you don't mind the outreach. I know the circumstances of my departure were abrupt. Certain sensitive projects required discretion, as I'm sure you understand. I'm doing some off-site follow-up for Julian regarding the Zurich acquisition, and a question has come up about the integrity of our off-site data transfer protocols, specifically the ones you personally overhauled in Q2. I was hoping you might have a moment to speak, completely off the record. Your insight would be invaluable. Best, Claire Donovan. The message was a masterwork of social engineering. It hinted that she was still working for Julian on a secret mission, flattering Gavin's ego by referencing his specific work and positioning him as a crucial expert. It was a lure baited with secrecy and importance. She hit send, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Meanwhile, across the city, Julian was in his own private hell. He sat alone in his vast, silent office long after everyone else had gone home. The digital forensics report lay on his desk, its findings as absolute and damning as ever. But his gut, the instinct that had built him an empire, was screaming that it was wrong. He pulled up Claire's employee file, a flawless record, glowing commendations. He opened the Zurich proposal, his notes and her notes intermingling on the pages, evidence of their perfect synergy. He remembered her face at Kronenhalle, her unwavering integrity in the face of Klaus Schmidt's greed. The two pictures would not reconcile, the woman of principle and the corporate traitor. One of them had to be a lie. He leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes, and then it hit him. A stray thought, a different file. He typed furiously, accessing the building's security logs for the 50th floor. He filtered for a specific name, Victoria Croft. He cross-referenced her entry and exit times for the past month against her official work calendar. And there it was, a tiny discrepancy, an anomaly. The night before the leak, Victoria had left the office at 8 p.m., just as her calendar indicated.
But her keycard had been used to access the 50th floor again for just 2 minutes at 11:32 p.m., an entry that corresponded to no meeting, no scheduled work. A ghost in the machine. It wasn't proof of anything, not yet, but it was a thread, the first loose thread in Victoria's perfectly woven frame. For the first time in 2 days, a flicker of hope ignited in Julian's chest. He had been so focused on the digital evidence against Claire that he hadn't thought to look for the digital shadow of her accuser. Back in her apartment, Claire stared at her screen. Minutes turned into an hour. Nothing. She was about to close her laptop in despair when 3 dots appeared in the chat window. Gavin Price was typing. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared, a tiny digital heartbeat of indecision. Claire held her breath. After an agonizing minute, a message finally appeared. It was short and paranoid. Cannot discuss on an unsecured platform. Brant and Forth Coffee Shop. 30 minutes. Come alone. This was it. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She threw on a simple jacket, grabbed her keys, and headed out, a soldier walking into enemy territory armed with nothing but a desperate bluff. The coffee shop was anonymous, filled with the low hum of conversation and the hiss of an espresso machine. Gavin was already there, tucked into a dark corner booth, nursing a cup of black coffee. He looked pale and jittery, his eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. He was in over his head. "Thanks for meeting me," she began, sliding into the booth. She started with her cover story. "About those data protocols." "I don't know what you're talking about," he cut her off, his voice a low mumble. "I can't talk about company business." Claire leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It was time to spring the trap. "Gavin, let's stop wasting time. This isn't about protocols. It's about Victoria's special project, the high-level vulnerability scan she needed you for." Gavin's eyes widened in panic, and she pressed her advantage. "I'm not here to get you in trouble. Julian is cleaning house, and he's separating the loyal soldiers from the traitors. He already knows about Victoria's late-night keycard access. He's just trying to understand how she pulled it off."
It was a masterful lie, weaving the one piece of information Julian had just discovered, a fact she couldn't possibly know, into her narrative. To Gavin, it sounded like the irrefutable truth, coming from the CEO's most trusted confidant. His carefully constructed composure shattered. "It was a test," he blurted out, his voice cracking. "A red team exercise. She said it was a board-authorized drill to test the security of the CEO's office. Top secret. She said my job was to find a vulnerability." The confession tumbled out. He explained that he had discovered a zero-day exploit in a recent software patch he had installed company-wide. It created a temporary, untraceable backdoor. He used it to generate a one-time remote access token, which he gave to Victoria. "She paid me a $20,000 consulting fee for the simulation," he stammered. "I had no idea she was going to use it to leak real data. I swear, I thought it was just a drill." Claire kept her face a mask of stone, though her heart was racing. She had him. "A consulting fee, Gavin. In cash or a wire transfer?" she pushed. "A wire, for plausible deniability." "You are an accessory to corporate espionage," Claire said, her voice cold and hard. "You're facing years in prison. Or you can help me, and I can convince Julian that you were a pawn, not a conspirator." Gavin was trembling now. "What do you want?" "Everything," she said. "The source code for the exploit, your encrypted chat logs with Victoria, and a copy of the bank transaction for that $20,000 payment. Send it to this secure email address. You have 1 hour." While Claire was executing her counterattack, Julian was pulling on his own thread. The late-night keycard access was suspicious, but not damning. He needed more.
Acting on a hunch, he made a call to the fraud division of his private bank, a service available only to their top-tier clients. Citing a potential internal embezzlement scheme, he requested an immediate review of Victoria Croft's recent financial activities. 20 minutes later, his private line rang. "It's almost certainly nothing, Mr. Sterling," the banker said. "All her standard high-end expenditures. There is one minor anomaly. A wire transfer 3 days ago. She sent $20,000 to a Mr. Gavin Price." Julian's blood ran cold. Gavin Price, the senior network analyst, the man whose budget request had been on his desk last week. A $20,000 payment. A motive. A puzzle piece slammed into place. He immediately requested the transaction records and any communications associated with the transfer. Back in her apartment, Claire's hands were shaking as she opened her encrypted email. It was there, a message from Gavin. Attached were 3 files, a string of code, a log of encrypted chats that clearly outlined Victoria's request for remote access for a simulation, and a PDF. She opened the PDF. It was a bank statement showing a $20,000 payment from Victoria Croft to Gavin Price. She had the weapon. She had the proof. At that exact moment, 50 stories above the city, an email arrived for Julian from his bank. He opened the attachment. It was the record of a $20,000 wire transfer from Victoria Croft to Gavin Price. Separated by miles, united by the truth, they were both staring at the same irrefutable piece of evidence. The frame had been broken. Now all that was left was the reckoning. A single word blinked back at Claire in the chat window. "Okay," followed by a location, a time, and a warning to come alone. It was the break she needed. At that exact moment, 50 stories up, Julian Sterling stared at the damning bank record on his screen. The name Gavin Price was a brand on his mind. A $20,000 payment, a motive. The pieces of the puzzle were no longer scattered. They were snapping together with magnetic force, forming a picture not of Claire's guilt, but of Victoria's treachery. He had been a fool. A CEO who had trusted hard data over his own sound judgment, his own heart. The protocol he had followed, the evidence he had accepted, it was all just part of the frame. He had let his most valuable asset walk out the door in shame. He had betrayed her. He grabbed his phone, his thumb hovering over Claire's name in his contacts. He hesitated. What could he possibly say? But the thought of her alone and believing he had abandoned her was more unbearable than any professional failure. He pressed the call button. Claire was on her way out the door to meet with Gavin when her phone rang. It was Julian. A wave of anger and hurt washed over her. She almost ignored it, but her discipline took over. She answered, her voice pure ice. "Yes?" "Claire, don't hang up." Julian's voice was urgent, strained. I know about the payment to Gavin Price. I just found the record. I was wrong. God, I was so wrong. I should have trusted you. No matter what the data said, I should have trusted you. I am so sorry." The apology was direct, absolute, and stripped of all pride. It cracked the ice around her heart, but it didn't melt it. "It's glad your data finally caught up to your instincts," she said, her voice still cool. "I'm on my way to meet with Gavin now. I have his full confession, the chat logs, and the code he used. What are my orders, CEO?"
The sarcastic title stung him, as she intended. "Your orders," he said softly, "are to come back. Send me the evidence. A car's on its way to you right now. We are going to end this, together, the way we should have from the start." An hour later, Claire Donovan walked back through the doors of Sterling Innovations. The whispers that had followed her out in shame were now whispers of awe and confusion as she strode directly to the elevator, her head held high, and ascended to the 50th floor. She found Julian in his office, the evidence she had sent displayed on a large screen. They didn't speak of the apology at first. They were two generals, laying out their weapons before the final battle. Her confession from Gavin, his financial records, his keycard logs. Together, it was an ironclad case. "It's time," Julian said, his jaw set. He pressed the intercom. "Please send Ms. Croft, our head of legal, and Marcus from security to my office, immediately." Victoria arrived first, an arrogant smirk playing on her lips. When she saw Claire standing beside Julian, her composure momentarily cracked, but she recovered with a sneer. "Well, look what the cat dragged back in. Have you come to beg for your job back, sweetie? I'm afraid that position has already been filled." "Have a seat, Victoria," Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. As the lawyer and security chief filed in, Julian began. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stated the facts, laying out each piece of evidence like a card in a winning hand. "At 11:32 p.m., the night of the leak, your keycard was used to access this floor. At 2:17 a.m., the data was sent from Miss Donovan's workstation." He paused. 3 days ago, you made a $20,000 wire transfer to a senior network analyst, Gavin Price. Victoria's face went pale. "That's preposterous. He was a consultant." "We know," Julian continued, cutting her off. "He consulted on how to build a zero-day exploit to gain remote access to a secure terminal. We have his full confession. We have your chat logs discussing the Red Team simulation." "He's lying. He acted alone. He tried to extort me," Victoria shrieked, her arrogance dissolving into frantic desperation. This was Claire's moment. She stepped forward, her voice calm and clear. "No one will believe that, Victoria, because Gavin told us the story you fed him, that it was a top-secret test authorized by the board." Claire looked at the company lawyer. "Oddly, when I took the liberty of calling 2 of our board members this afternoon, they had no recollection of authorizing such a test. Your lie is a dead end." It was the final, devastating blow. Victoria stared at her, her eyes wide with the raw hatred of the utterly defeated. She had been outmaneuvered, outstrategized, and outclassed. Julian stood up, the judge delivering his sentence. "You are fired, effective immediately. Your crimes go far beyond a breach of company policy. You can expect to hear from our lawyers, and I will be turning this entire file over to the district attorney's office." He nodded to Marcus. "Escort her out." As Victoria was led away, a broken and pathetic figure, the lawyer and security chief quietly excused themselves, leaving Julian and Claire alone in the silent office. The battle was won. The professional crisis was over, but the personal one remained. Julian turned to her, the power and anger draining from his face, leaving only a deep, profound remorse. He took a step toward her, his eyes pleading for a forgiveness he wasn't sure he deserved. "Claire," he began, his voice thick with emotion. He stopped, struggling for the words to bridge the chasm his doubt had created between them. The trust had been broken, and now, in the quiet aftermath of their victory, they had to face the question of whether it could ever truly be rebuilt. The silence in the office was a heavy blanket, muffling the sounds of the city below. The battle was over, but the wreckage of their personal trust lay between them. Julian looked at her, his face a canvas of remorse, stripped of the usual layers of command and control. "Claire," he began, his voice raw. He took a half-step forward, then stopped, as if held back by the chasm his actions had created. He walked not toward her, but to the window, staring down at the city lights that were beginning to flicker to life. "In my world, everything is an asset or a liability. People, companies, deals, they're variables in an equation. For 20 years, I've trusted the data above all else. It's how I built everything." He turned back to face her, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own.
When Marcus showed me that report, the CEO took over. The data was absolute, so the conclusion had to be absolute. But my gut, my heart knew it was a lie, and I ignored it. I failed you, Claire. I failed you because I trusted the algorithm in my head more than the man who stood with you by the lake in Zurich. I let the data blind me to the truth of who you are. I can only promise you that it will never happen again.
Claire listened, letting his words settle. He wasn't making an excuse. He was offering a confession. She thought of the humiliation, the heartbreak, the lonely walk out of the building. The hurt was real and deep. "I understand the logic, Julian," she said, her voice quiet but strong. "I've built my own life on being careful, on facts. But when I packed my desk into that cardboard box, the only fact that mattered was that I was alone. The trust I had placed in you, it felt like the worst investment I had ever made." She saw him flinch, but she needed him to hear the truth. She let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "But then, I remembered. On the jet, you didn't just assign me tasks, you asked for my counsel. In Zurich, you didn't just close a deal, you made me your partner. You showed me that you could see past the data. You saw me." She took a step toward him, bridging the gap herself. "The CEO made a mistake, but I came to Zurich with the man. I choose to trust the man." A wave of relief so profound it was almost staggering washed over Julian's face. He closed the remaining distance between them, his hands coming up to gently cup her face. "Let me earn that trust back, every day for the rest of my life." And then he kissed her. It was not a kiss of desperation or of victory. It was a kiss of healing, of forgiveness, a quiet and solemn promise. It was the beginning of their real story.
6 months later, the headline in the Financial Sentinel read, "Sterling's New Power Player: How Chief Strategy Officer Claire Donovan is Redefining the Future of Innovation." Below the headline was a picture of Claire, poised and confident, standing beside Julian on the floor of the stock exchange. She was no longer his assistant or his advisor. She was his partner in every sense of the word. Her insight and integrity had become the company's new North Star. That evening, they stood on the terrace of Julian's penthouse. The city lights spread out before them like a fallen constellation. The view was the same as from his office window, but this wasn't a place of work or crisis. This was their home. "Chief Strategy Officer," Julian said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "It has a nice ring to it." "It's better than corporate trader," she quipped, leaning back against him. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the endless river of headlights below. "Do you ever think about that first day?" she asked softly. "The champagne, the chaos, the very handsome waiter?" "Every single day," he murmured into her hair. "It's my favorite story. The day a hurricane in a navy blue suit walked into my perfectly ordered life and saved me from the quiet, predictable calm." He turned her around to face him, his expression soft and full of a love she now knew was unshakable. "You are the best, most reckless, and most brilliant decision I have ever made." He kissed her, a slow, deep kiss, filled with the promise of 1,000 more victories to come, personal and professional, all of them faced together. Claire chose to forgive and believe in the person Julian was, not the one mistake he made. What would you have done in her place? Let us know in the comments below.